Hey scholars, just to review what we did the other night, I figured it would be a good idea to do a little screencast-o-matic where I record the screen and you hear my voice. So the idea, once again, of Keynesian economics is to have the government play a more active role. John Maynard Keynes created macroeconomics, the idea that the government could stabilize the economy. The real key purpose of fiscal policy is to stabilize the economy, okay? The way they do that is with taxing and spending. Generally speaking, the classic idea of economics was the government should do nothing, laissez-faire, hands off. Keynes argued that with taxing and spending, not just regular spending, but discretionary spending, like the stimulus, you could remove recessionary gaps and inflationary gaps in the economy, as you see, right? But the key was to lower or raise taxes. And that's why we use the multiplier. Once again, we're still having a little bit of problems with the multiplier, but that's okay. Remember, if the multiplier, as long as you remember, the spending multiplier has to equal 1. All right? So therefore, if we have a gap here, let's say we have a gap simply of about 200 billion. If we have a gap of 200 billion, and we know the MPC is 0.2, then we know the multiplier. From that, we should be able to calculate the multiplier is 1 over 0.2, which equals 5. So therefore, we just take 200 billion, divide by 5, which means the government would have to interject $40 billion into the economy. Or it has to remove taxes out of the economy. Okay? So what they'd have to do is they'd have to remove taxes to increase the amount of spending in the economy. So if they have a $200 billion gap, now we know the tax multiplier would be negative MPC divided by MPS. So in this situation, it would be negative 0.8 divided by 0.2, which would equal negative 4. So they'd have to lower taxes by, we take 200, divide it by negative 4, and it would equal $50 billion. They'd have to lower taxes by 50 billion. And that would increase the amount of money out there by 200. So that's why we use the multiplier. Those are the two key multipliers that we need at this point. The spending multiplier and also the tax multiplier. This is the tax. This is the spending. Good? All right. So that's how we alleviate either recessionary gaps or inflationary gaps. Once again, both of these graphs are aggregate expenditure. I can't guarantee that you'll have to, I'm not sure this year, because of the new format of the exam, if you're going to be required to draw graphs. That's usually a major part of the Part 2 exam, is drawing a graph. We'll see. We're not sure. But generally, the graphs that you mostly work with are the aggregate supply, aggregate demand graphs, and also the money market graphs. So we learned about, these are examples, once again, automatically the economy has stabilized. Unemployment insurance, social security payments, what have you. But a discretionary stabilizer in the 1970s, it was the Superfund to clean up all the toxic waste that was emitted during the Industrial Revolution and forward. Right now we have the stimulus package, a $2 trillion discretionary package to supplement unemployment, give each individual straight cash. Those are all discretionary stabilizers. Generally speaking, discretionary fiscal policies when we have situations like high unemployment. Right now, unfortunately, with the COVID-19 virus, it's unprecedented. We've never had a disease or an illness shut down the nation's economy. So that's why we really don't know where we're going right now. I will go over this eventually, international payments balance, but that is not a unit that will be included on the exam. But it's very important to understand the balance of payments, which is more important than trade, balance of trade. Trade balances and deficits we'll learn more about later on, but essentially if a nation exports more than it imports, it has a trade surplus. If it imports more than it exports, which is the United States, that is a trade deficit. Okay? So this all factors in with discretionary fiscal policy. The problem with fiscal policy, once again, is it can crowd out the consumer. The government must borrow money. The government must borrow money. It can't say that enough. It can't just create it. If it creates it, it could cause hyperinflation. So therefore, the government's going to be selling bonds to finance this debt. So simply put, by the government selling bonds, when we look at the loanable funds market, which we'll get to eventually, what happens is the government decides to borrow money. So here's the demand for money, and then here's the supply of money in the loanable funds market. So what happens now is now the government demands much more money. So if this is interest rates over here, oops, let me just get rid of that. If this is interest rates over here, we'll get rid of that one more time. Sorry. If this is interest rates over here, interest rates really represent the cost of money. Okay? Interest rates represent what it costs to borrow money. On the x-axis is simply quantity, the quantity of money available. Okay? So what happens is, as the government demands more money to borrow, interest rates rise. So interest rates rise. So the cost of borrowing money goes up. So if the cost of borrowing money goes up, people borrow less. And therefore, although the government tried to stimulate the economy, as you see, went from AD1, where it was below full employment, now it's at AD2, the government now has fallen back. Well, now what happened is aggregate demand, the total demand for all goods and services, now moves backwards. Because now consumers and businesses are dropping out. They're not borrowing money, so they're not spending money, and decreasing aggregate demand. But yet the price levels still stay high, and this creates stagflation. So crowding out, once again, the government spending exceeds tax revenues, they're creating a deficit. The deficit increases. The government has to sell more bonds to finance debt. So to sell more bonds, they increase interest yields. Interest yields are essentially the interest that you get on the bond. So there are fewer private bonds offered, like a company. I'd like to sell my government bond. My government bond, let's say, is getting 10% interest. But as a business, I can't afford to pay anybody 10% interest, so I'm not going to make any bonds, so I'm not going to grow my business, so I'm going to hire fewer employees. And therefore, we end up in stagflation. And stagflation is when we have high prices and high unemployment and a reduction in real output, or the GDP moves inward, unemployment goes up, and prices are up. And therefore, fiscal policy can't really fix this problem. And that's why we move towards monetary policy. And we'll learn about that soon. Okay? This is just when we talk about direct expenditures, sometimes the government, when it puts money into circulation or it stimulates the economy, it can take money that people already spend and just supplement it, and it doesn't really increase anything. What do I mean? Let's say the government, years ago when we had the 2008 recession, most people buy school supplies for their students. Well, the government decided that parents shouldn't have to pay for school supplies, so school districts were given money to provide school supplies. That didn't create any new spending. It just traded off spending. It shifted the spending. It shifted spending, pardon me about that, from the government to from the government to people. Okay? So it's shifting spending from the government now, from people to the government. All right? So that's what we mean by that. Also, sometimes people are worried that later down the line, they're going to have to pay for their tax. They're going to have to pay higher taxes to pay for these deficits. So sometimes they save money, which doesn't allow fiscal policy to work as well. And that's what we mean by the Ricardian equivalence theorem. Other times, the government doesn't react fast enough, or the government doesn't recognize there's a problem, or it just takes too long for fiscal policy to work. Fiscal policy isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing, but it doesn't always work as quickly to react to problems. Generally, what it does is it soothes the economy. Just like when you have a virus, not the COVID-19, but like when you have, you get a virus, it's just got to take time before washes out of you. It takes time before you feel better. But you could take some Tylenol, you could take some Advil, and it'll make you feel better. And this way it's not so bad, and you could still maybe function. You're not just totally out of shape and done. And that's what really fiscal policy does. Okay? One of the ideas also with fiscal policy is to provide incentives, using tax rates, or essentially creating tax-free zones, or giving tax breaks to large corporations or wealthy individuals. And that creates that idea of a supply-side economics. But the problem with supply-side economics, go back over here, or trickle-down economics, is it doesn't always reach the people, and it doesn't have a multiplier effect. So these are some of the shortcomings that come with fiscal policy. And here's an example of trickle-down economics. It's kind of a joke. But you see, the champagne has run out, and only the people at the top have enjoyed it. And that's because generally the spending multiplier for the people at the top is much lower. They don't spend as much of their income as people at the bottom. It's just economic observations, but very affluent people tend to accumulate wealth. They don't tend to spend all their wealth. When you're living day to day on the lower end, as a low socioeconomic person, you're generally spending more than you earn to try to get by. And that's kind of why we need to worry about monetary policy and monetarism. Generally, it can be very good fiscal policy during abnormal times, all right, like the Great Depression, war, the Great Recession, and now. Okay? But it really soothes the economy. That's the idea. It really sets the economy and soothes it along. All right, next time we'll learn about money and monetary policy. Thanks for listening in. Always feel free to email me and ask questions. Be well and stay well.